All right, let's get started. So welcome to today's APBP webinar, a research roadmap for active transportation. I'm Lauren Santangelo, APBP Program Manager. We're very pleased that you've all joined us today. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. All attendees are automatically muted and cameras turned off. If you have a question for our presenters throughout the presentation today, please enter them into the chat by selecting everyone from the drop-down menu. We will have some designated time for Q&A at the end of the webinar today. So submit your questions throughout and we will get to those at the end. Also, we have submitted this webinar for AICP credit. So be sure to claim your credits if needed through the American Planning Association. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our presenters. We have two presenters today. Shannon Eggleston has over 25 years of experience in the transportation industry and is currently the Program Director for Civil Rights, Agency Administration, and Active Transportation at AASHTO. She works with the AASHTO Strategic Management Committee to identify emerging and priority national topics to be addressed by the association, provides general direction to the AASHTO committees and councils, and identifies outside entities with which AASHTO should coordinate on topics of mutual interest. She also manages the AASHTO Active Transportation, Civil Rights, Equity, Workforce Development, and General Agency Administration programs to provide policy and technical support to the AASHTO Board of Directors and member departments. And Dr. Jennifer Dill is a professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University and the director of Transportation Research and Education Center, or TREC. Her research focuses on the relationships between transportation, land use, health, and the environment, with a focus on bicycling and walking. She was APBP's Professional Researcher of the Year in 2020 and served as a principal investigator for the research roadmap for the AASHTO Council on Active Transportation. So welcome to Shannon and Jennifer. And with that, I will turn things over to Shannon to get us started.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm Jennifer. Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you to APBP for having us here today. I am thrilled to be here to talk to you about the Active Transportation Council at AASHTO and its new research roadmap. APBP is an absolute leader in this arena, and I hope that this can be the first of many collaborations. So first of you that don't know what the acronym stands for, AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and we represent the transportation interests of the 50 states as well as Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And AASHTO functions, I think, very similarly to how APBP does through committees. We just have a lot of committees. We have them both modally and topically. The council itself was added to the modal groups about 5 years ago as part of an association-wide restructuring. And so where it is in the placement with the association, it's on par with the other modes, with highways, public transport, rail, and water. And we have all 52 member departments on the council, and some members have 2 to 3 members as well. You're allowed to have up to 3. So although the council was developed 5 years ago, well, I should say approved 5 years ago, it took a while to get it up and running. In some respects, we are still trying to find our bearings, both within the association and within the industry. I've worked with the council since its inception, and as Lauren mentioned earlier, I'm also working on equity and a bunch of other topics. So I was really excited to see the work that APBP is doing with relation to equity. So before we jump in and have Jennifer provide you the details about the research roadmap, I wanted to talk to you about just a couple of strategic plan items for the Active Transportation Council and some of our priority activities that we've been undertaking. One of the first ones is partnering and collaboration. And that is, coordinating within the AASHTO committees, but also partnering with external stakeholders. And in terms of internal coordination, we've really been focusing collaboration with the committees that oversee development of the various AASHTO publications, highways and streets, design and safety, We actually jointly ballot 6 documents with the Highways and Streets Council, including the bike guide, the pedestrian guide, and the geometric design guidebook. When we first got ourselves up and running, some of these publications were many, many years into development. So although we did provide comments, it was difficult to really make an impact at that point in time. So to make sure there was going to be early engagement, we actually developed a joint task force with active transportation and highways and streets to provide top-down guidance to these groups prior to them beginning to develop them. And we're actually going to be using that process for the first time with the Green Book 8 as it's being developed. With relation to coordination with external stakeholders, we have worked with several groups, the League of American Bicyclists. We go to each other's meetings and we support one another. And we've had certain folks come and talk to us, like Safe Routes to School, Rails to Trails, and Adventure Cycling Association. But quite honestly, we really need to be doing a better job at this. We need to be doing it more frequently and more substantively. And again, I hope that we can do this with APBP. One of our other strategic items is related to leading AASHTO policy activities for active transportation. So we respond to administrative and congressional actions. We had a series of policy statements developed related to the IIJA. And with all of the active transportation provisions that are in the IIJA, there should be plenty of opportunities for us to partner regarding implementation of those provisions. Communications is a big priority, broadly communicating the value of active transportation to the transportation system, the environment, and communities to support investment in active transportation. We actually have a working group specifically dedicated to this, and we are seeking funding to develop a communications manual and training materials, and we can provide more information about that. I want to make sure Jennifer has enough time. Obviously, safety is one of our biggest priorities. We've had a peer exchange with the Committee on Safety, provided input to the Highway Safety Manual, but again, it was very, very late in the process. And we're really trying to focus on getting research related to active transportation safety. And with relation to research, as I mentioned, this is a new council, and we've been, building ourselves up and finding our purpose and our place and where we can add value and be most effective. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was have a substantive research program, because there's so many things we don't know related to data and safety and a lot of things. So we actually obtained funding to develop a research roadmap related to active transportation for the council. And we have a work group specifically dedicated to implementing the roadmap. So I'll talk a little bit more after Jennifer about using the roadmap and the research proposals that we actually submitted this year. But for now, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thank you. I am going to share my screen and my presentation. And I am assuming, since I have not heard otherwise, that you can hear me and that you can see my screen. So thank you, Shannon, for that, for kicking us off. And thank you, everyone who is here. And so I am first going to give you a roadmap for my presentation about the roadmap. And the things that I am going to cover is first a little bit about the process that we use to develop the roadmap, and then so what's in it, and then finishing up my section with how you can use the roadmap, and more largely how you can get involved and influence research in active transportation. So the process for developing, I first need to recognize it wasn't just me, by all means. We had quite a team on this. This slide highlighting the main folks at Portland State University that participated in developing this, both faculty, researchers, and students. And some of these names may be familiar to you. And then our partner on this was Toole Design, led by Stephanie Brody as the co-PI on the project. And again, probably some other familiar faces participating. And there was also, this was a project that was conducted under the umbrella of the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, NCHRP. And every NCHRP project has a panel that oversees the project. And so I want to recognize the people who were on that project panel helping us conducting the project, and in addition to Ann Hartel, the program officer. And then also we worked with the Council on Active Transportation, and particularly their steering committee that Shannon has noted. So how did we pull this whole thing together? Because if you have looked at it, you will see that it's a pretty big document. I actually did print it out, and it's a lot of paper if you do that. And so how did we get there? This slide just gives you an overview of the steps. And I'm not going to go into depth on any of these, but to give you an idea, we first inventoried the existing research and research needs. We did some initial assessment of gaps. We worked on reviewing what we thought was the most relevant research topics and what we know in terms of those research topics. Task 4 was a big part of the project, and that was outreach to actually develop the roadmap and prioritize research needs. And that effort was led by Toole Design, Stephanie Brody. And then we pulled that all together into the actual roadmap and the other products that we produced. And on the side there was developing sort of a continuity and implementation plan. So that's the overview of how we got there. What I will talk a little bit about in terms of process was sort of how did we come up with all these needs and how did we prioritize them? We started out with a long list of 110 needs. And again, we searched a lot of existing documents and all sorts of places, came up with a list, sorted it, got rid of duplicates, all that kind of stuff. And then we had the public outreach part of this. We first did a survey. Some of you may have participated and taken that survey to sort of help us prioritize different needs within different categories. Then we held a series of workshops sort of in three sets of workshops that, again, some of you may have participated in those, and I really appreciate that. And through that workshop process, we both helped prioritize the needs in terms of what needs to be done sooner. And then we also got more in-depth information about, okay, on this topic, what answers do we need to these problems? With all of that information, plus some of the team's knowledge on research that's in progress. So one of the challenges with a project like this is that, the world of research does not stop during the 16 months that we were working on developing the roadmap. It keeps on going, and we were trying to coordinate what we were doing with other efforts and projects that were underway. So sort of using that knowledge, we did, and the input, we came up with 15 needs that sort of rose to the top. Those we then got input from the panel and the CAT to narrow it down to 6, because part of our charge in the original project description was to develop 6 research needs statements. So we had to come up with, what are the 6 most important things for that? So those were the 6. And then the remainder of the 15 we have labeled as high priority. And then we have 31 medium priority research needs. And then the remainder, what we've called lower priority. Everything is obviously important. I'm a researcher. I want it all done, right? But we have to prioritize somehow. So what's in the roadmap? First of all, I want to tell you where to get it if you want to actually see the roadmap and the related documents. That is the website address. It is an ugly address that I don't expect you to remember. So I recommend, until you bookmark it, to do what I do and just type in Research Roadmap AASHTO Council Active Transportation into your favorite search engine, and this page should be up top. And There are 4 links on the page to the products of our effort, and I'm going to talk about those, particularly focusing on the first 2. The first, or I say the first product, and partly because it was task 3 in our effort, but everything was released at the same time, and that is the research review. So this was, this is a document that has information on 22 topics where we have tried to summarize existing and ongoing research. So for each of those 22 topics, we first try to answer the question, what do we know? So we sifted through hundreds of documents to try to highlight some of the most important research findings that we thought were most relevant to practice. We then identify research gaps within this topic area. We talk a little bit about sort of how this research is done, like what types of methods are used to answer these types of questions. We have a table that highlights some of what we thought were the most significant and relevant research projects that were underway at the time we were doing this. So last spring and summer, to sort of alert people, well, you know, there's going to be new stuff coming. And in particular, in this example, there's 4 projects underway that are relevant. We obviously have all of our references listed there, which are usually quite lengthy. And then at the end, we have included some of the key words and terms that show up when you do a search on TREC for this type of research. And I'm going to talk about that a little more towards the end. So then there's the research roadmap itself. And this is what I refer to as sort of the main document. This is the roadmap. It was released again in July of last year. So it is a hefty document. There's a lot in here. It can be overwhelming. And I'm sort of hoping that this webinar is one way to help you navigate through it and find what is most interest to you. So there's a section that talks about how we develop the roadmap and the background of it, but the meat of the roadmap are these 110 research needs. They have been organized into 7 topic areas: data, design, equity and accessibility, planning, policy and practice, safety, and technology and micromobility. So that's how they're organized in here. We also, in the document, there is a matrix that gives an overview of these 110 needs and the priorities by topic area, and identifies within AASHTO in particular, other committees and councils that may want to collaborate on this research. Then in terms of the actual needs, so what is in here about the needs? I mentioned already that there were 6 of the needs that we identified as highest priority. These are listed here on the screen. They are not ranked. So A1 was not the most important. These are all in the same bucket in terms of highest priority needs. For each of these 6, the team wrote a full problem statement that is in the format to submit the idea into the NCHRP funding process. And so it's a few, each of these is a few pages long, and it's all in the roadmap. And all of these ideas have been submitted by the CAT into the current NCHRP process to be considered for future funding, and Shannon's going to touch on that at the end of this. Then the next 2 sets of priorities in terms of research needs are the high priority and the medium priority needs, and there are 40 needs in this group. For each of these needs, we developed what we called a research need brief that highlights, gives it sort of an overview of the issue and the problem that is being addressed here. We've identified some research objectives based on what we already know about this topic. The team came up with, well, these are, some objectives that would help fill the existing gaps. We talk a little, or we have some advice on what type of research might be most appropriate, and where potential funding could come to do this research, whether it be through the NCHRP process or some other mechanisms. We have some timelines, some other potential research partners that would be interested in this research, and again, sort of related projects that were underway at the time of developing this. So there are 40 of those where there's more information. And I will highlight the 9 sort of high priority needs that come right after those top 6. And again, I want to emphasize that there's no ranking. All of these needs, there is sort of a letter and a numbering system. Do not interpret, that number B1 is more important than, B4. The letters and numbers were primarily a way to organize the whole roadmap. And so these were some of the high priority needs that through that process we have identified. And then we have 64 what we said lower priority needs. They certainly are not low priority, but they are lower than the others, at least through that we identified through this process. And for each of these, we just basically have the title. We have some existing notes about existing research needs statements that other organizations have written, and some other information. So a few other things that are in the roadmap. In doing this whole process, there were some themes that we thought sort of cover, many or all of the topics and everything in the roadmap. And so we did highlight those at the beginning of the roadmap, the main document. And first is equity. And so we recognize that nearly every research need, all 110 in this roadmap, has some sort of an implication for equity. There are several needs that focus on equity as a topic, and particularly on racial equity. And then there are many others in here where within the objectives, for example, there may be a component that addresses equity. And we also recognize that, there's equity can be examined for many different population groups, racial equity, economic, gender identity, immigrant background, disability, age, and more. And in reviewing the work that we did, we do recommend that, sometimes you might be able in one project to address all of those dimensions of equity, but that's not always possible. So sometimes we need to focus on particular aspects, whether it be racial equity or perhaps disability status, et cetera, and that we also really need to recognize intersectionality when we are doing this work. Another theme that came up was the need for research about practice and policy. So I think most of us here probably recognize that in many cases, we actually have relevant research on what effective solutions are, but for whatever reason, it's not being implemented or not being implemented as extensively as we would like. And so there is a need to do research about how to identify how to change institutions, how to change policies and practices that will overcome these implementation barriers. And there are some research needs in the document that focus on that. Also, a theme that came up frequently in our discussions with the panel and other people involved in the process is that there is some older inadequate research and assumptions that sometimes are a barrier to changing practice. And there is a need to do new research to update or change those perceptions so we can move forward in having more safe active transportation. Overall, definitely a big need for more crash modification factors. Those of you who work in the safety world will probably be nodding your head yes, but these are key pieces of information that help engineers and other practitioners design safer systems. And we don't have a lot of crash modification factors related specifically to active transportation infrastructure. And then also that, you know, in the past, we often sort of put walking and bicycling into sort of the same bucket in terms of doing research and policy and et cetera. And oftentimes they really need to be considered separately because the needs perhaps are different. And that doesn't even get me started with sort of our new mobility options of scooters and everything else. So one thing I do want everyone to keep in mind is that this research roadmap should be considered as a starting point. Things are changing rapidly in this field, and so it's a starting point. And also, it is not comprehensive. This was a roadmap that we developed for the AASHTO Council on Active Transportation. So in terms of prioritizing needs and which needs we focused on in more depth or which research we focused in more depth were the topics that were most relevant to AASHTO and the partnering organizations of AASHTO. So always keep that in mind. So there may be, you know, your favorite research topic may not show up here clearly, or it may be a lower priority. And just to keep in mind that the context that we developed this for. So how can you use the roadmap and get involved in research? And particularly, this is for, you know, assuming that you're not part of the Council on Active Transportation within AASHTO. And so I developed these slides for sort of the broader APBP audience. So first of all, I am hoping that all of you or most of you will find the research review to be a useful reference. And some examples of that, a couple weeks ago, someone on the APBP listserv asked a question that I'm paraphrasing here about, you know, evidence of shared lane markings in terms of a safety benefit. And so literally what I did is I pulled up my PDF copy of the research review. I did a search on Sharrows and found an answer. And so this is an idea of sort of the level of information that we've included in the research review, really focusing on sort of key findings from the vast range of research. Another example question that I hear a lot is about economic impacts of active transportation infrastructure, particularly when we are trying to work with local governments and business organizations, et cetera, trying to prove or make the case, a strong case that this is going to be good on many dimensions. And so, for example, we have a whole set, one of the 22 topics in the review is about economic benefits of walking and bicycling in the many dimensions. And so, for example, you know, we've highlighted some of the research on you know, businesses that are along corridors that may have been retrofitted with bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So to me, this is a go-to, you know, where do I find some quick answers on a topic that I don't know much about? So as I've alluded to a few times, this is rapidly changing. We always knew, like, as soon as we're putting it out, it's already out of date because new stuff comes out literally, it's every day in terms of research. So how can you sort of keep up on what that new research is? And I know it's overwhelming. One thing within the context of the research review document, we have identified some key major research projects that were underway at the time we wrote this, and there are links. So one thing to do is just click on those links, find the project, and see if it's been completed, and there's some results. And then the other thing you can do to find new research, and this is the way I do it, is to use TREC, which is a database maintained by the Transportation Research Board. This has a pretty easy web address to remember. And if you've used TREC before, you may have had an experience like many of us. You type something in and you got like 2,000 results, and it's a bit overwhelming, because when we started this project, we downloaded everything in TREC that came under the pedestrian and bicycle topic, and that there were over 17,000 records at that time. And a year later, there's a few thousand more, and so it is overwhelming. We have done a few things to try to help both the CAT and everyone else do more effective searches. So within the research review, we've listed the most common index terms that were showing up in the research that we were finding on this topic. So that can help you narrow your searches. And then also in the continuity and implementation plan, which was written primarily for the Council on Active Transportation, we do have a section in there that gives some advice on how to do a TRID search and how to use, the more in-depth search functions to narrow down your topic to things that are most relevant. And so if you feel like you need some help searching TRID, I encourage you on that main page where everything is, you can download the continuity and implementation plan and look on pages, it looks like 15 and 16 or so is where that advice is. We also provided a spreadsheet to the CAT that, again, anyone can download, that has some pre-populated searches for research in progress. So the TRIC database includes, journal articles and reports and all sorts of things that are published about research that's been completed, but it also has an inventory of research that is underway, that is being done, for example, at NCHRP or at universities or at state DOTs and other entities. And so you can go in there and search, well, what is the research that's going on right now? And that's what some of these pre-populated searches in the spreadsheet would help you do. So what if you want to influence research somehow, get your ideas funded, or make sure that the research in a topic area that you are concerned about is really addressing the needs of you and other practitioners. So how can you influence research? One place I want to point you to are the cooperative research programs of the Transportation Research Board. I think everyone here is quite definitely recognizes we have a lot of acronyms in our world. These are three: the National Cooperative Research Program, so NCHRP, TCRP, which is the Transit Cooperative Research Program, and there's a relatively new one called the Behavioral Traffic Safety Cooperative Research Program. Those are the three CRPs that are most relevant to active transportation research. There's also one on airports, and I have forgotten what else, but those are the three that are most relevant, that are most likely to be doing active transportation research. The TRB website has been reorganized over the past year or so it's much more clear on how to get information about these programs. They are all different in terms of how they solicit research ideas. So the NCHRP process, state DOTs can submit ideas to that process, and that's the 6 research statements that I mentioned earlier are going through that process. There are other parts of the NCHRP funding, like synthesis projects, that have a more open solicitation. Again, the transit one is different, and the BTSCRP is a little different too. I encourage you to go to this website to learn a little bit more. But one thing that I would encourage all of you to do is consider nominating yourself to be on one of the panels that oversees any of these projects. And there is information on this website. You can see, volunteer for panel service. And so you can go in there and see what panels are soliciting members, and that's the group that oversees how the research selects who does the research and then oversees actually doing the research and provides input that way. And so I encourage you to sign up on the email lists, check the website, etc. It's a great way to influence research. There's a few other ways. The Transportation Research Board committees, which I'm guessing a lot of you are already involved in, but if you are not, sign up to at least be a friend of either the pedestrian committee, the bicycle committee, and there are others, but those are obviously the key ones for active transportation, because those committees, and perhaps I'm a little biased, but I think they're two of the best committees within the many, many TRB committees. They are very active in terms of developing research ideas and trying to get those ideas funded and resulting in actual research. So I encourage you to get involved there. Every state DOT has a research office. They have research funding. They all have different processes for soliciting and selecting research projects. So I encourage whichever state you are in to look at the website and see how that is done, and see how you might be able to work with staff at your state DOT to get some projects in that process. There's also a pooled fund program that FHWA runs, but is very common for one or more, or actually two or more state DOTs or other agencies to put money together to do a larger project. University Transportation Centers, which I direct one at Portland State University. There are 30, actually, no, I'm losing track now. There are more now. There are over 35 federally funded university transportation centers that are funded through the surface transportation bills. All of those UTCs, to use that federal money, require non-federal matching funds. So as a UTC, we're always looking for partners who have some matching funds, and that can be cash funds or in-kind funds to help do research. So I encourage you to talk with folks at nearby or maybe not even nearby universities on how you might partner with them to get research done. With the new bill, the IIJA, or the, whoops, I left off the L, the bipartisan infrastructure law, there will be a new competition for UTCs over this calendar year. So look out for that as well. And then the US Department of Transportation right now is updating their 5-year research and development strategic plan. They have an open comment period. On the website, it says that it ended on January 31st, but I have heard that they extended it. And it does say on the website that they will, you can submit things after that date, and they will consider them. But I did hear that it was extended, though I couldn't find that on the website. So with that, that was sort of abrupt. I'm going to invite Shannon back to sort of talk about what the CAT is doing now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. So as you can see, we submitted 6 research statements. The ones that of the 9 the states deemed to be the highest priorities. And I know there's a lot of acronyms, but also the processes can be very confusing. So the process that's undertaken is that a state or AASHTO or FHWA can submit a research statement to this program. The program is funded through takedown of the state DOT federal planning money, specifically designated for research. So anyhow, those three groups can submit research statements, and then they are reviewed by the NCHRP staff. They are reviewed by FHWA. That now when they're in the process of coming back to AASHTO, and the AASHTO committees can comment on any of the research that they would like to. So, you know, and we had the opportunity to respond to any comments that NCHRP and or FHWA may have made to our research. So there were a few questions and comments on the 6 that we submitted. So we're in the process of developing replies to those. And then there's also some other research that that we are providing comments on. In addition to these submittals, I did want to point out one other submittal that I think is great. So the safety committee at AASHTO submitted a statement on enhancing the highway safety manual guidance for pedestrian and bicyclist countermeasures. So they submitted that on their own, and it's one of their high priorities for this year. So in addition to the ones you see here, that was one, and there was also some individual states that submitted active transportation related research. And then, you know, because we can comment on any of the research, I'm just kind of going through, I think there's like 100 and I can't remember how many, 150 maybe research proposals in total, and just adding like, consider adding active transportation, consider adding active transportation. So, or, you know, consider equity issues. So, so that's where we are in the process right now. And then it gets reviewed by one more group of state DOT folks. They add their comments. And then in March, the state DOT research folks get together and essentially vote on what are their priorities and fund as much as they can with the amount of funding that they have. So we'll know more come March about which ones were actually selected. I will say that it's highly unlikely that at least the first few priorities for each committee is not funded. So I'm hopeful that not only the safety one regarding the countermeasures, but, you know, several of the active transportation ones will be funded as well. And so that is basically where we are in the process. I was remiss in also thanking those of you that are on the webinar today that did provide input into this whole process. I know Jennifer and the state DOTs that worked on this had a very broad outreach group in terms of identifying priority research needs. So again, thank you for any input that you may have provided. And with that, Lauren, I think we are open for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both Shannon and Jennifer for all the excellent materials that you shared today. We do have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions for either of them or about the research roadmap, submit them into the chat now. I'm not seeing any questions yet. I believe we also have Rob, is it Bedenbaugh? I apologize, I'm probably not saying that correctly, that also may join us for Q&A. He also helped oversee the development of the roadmap. So I will pause and see if we have any questions from our audience that may come in. Okay, I see a question from Christine. What's the best way to take advantage of this research roadmap if you are an active transportation advocate working with city staff, council members, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. the first thing that pops into my mind is to use the research review. So to me, as I am interpreting that question, is if you're advocating with city staff and council members, you need some evidence to help your case for that advocacy. And I hope and believe that that research review is going to provide you in an efficient way some of that evidence of that you can use in talking with those the city's council members, et cetera. So that's to me the most immediate way that the roadmap is useful. I think perhaps if they come back and challenge you with like, well, there's no research on this. I can't, I can't do this because we don't know we don't have evidence. You could also use the roadmap to sort of see, is there research underway that's going to come out soon that will help answer those questions and address those concerns. And then I guess it's not really the roadmap, but always put a plug in for the APBP listserv. Is just a tremendous resource for getting feedback and help from other folks. So not roadmap specific.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And I did put the link, that ugly link to the NCHRP page where you can get all 4 products. I did put that in the chat.
Thank you. And I think someone else also put in the chat the link to the actual roadmap, the PDF version.
The PDF,
well.
great.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're both in the chat for everyone that's watching today. While we're waiting to see if there are any further questions that come in for Jennifer and Shannon and even for Rob, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to add about this process or about the roadmap for our group today?
I think one thing I'd like to add is, and it's really adding on to what Jennifer's already said, which is that things change pretty quickly, and a lot of the state DOTs do research on their own. And so I think we probably need to develop, and I can talk to Rob. Rob is a member of our Active Transportation Steering Committee from South Carolina DOT, and he was involved in the development of this book. But I think probably something we need to talk to the steering committee about is being able to update it on some regular basis, so we can like get rid of the ideas that have already been dealt with. And so many things are moving and changing all the time. Like we keep updating the definition of what active transportation is as new technologies are coming out. So I guess I would keep that in mind too. The state DOT folks also are doing a lot of research, and we're going to need to update this with some form of regularity. So stay tuned.
Great, thank you, Shannon. We do have one comment or question. Some people feel the latest AASHTO pedestrian design guide didn't go far enough to support active transportation. Is there anything encouraging you can say about the historically conservative approach to incorporating meaningful change into guidelines?
So as I said, we're working to still find our place and where we can be most effective. And with, I think, all 3 of the guides that I mentioned, the bike guide, the peg guide, and the green book, they had been, like 4 or 5 years into development by the time we stood up the committee. So it was very difficult to, make major redirections at that point in time, but they were able to incorporate some of our input where they could. I think that we are working right now with the Council on Highways and Streets on a bunch of efforts to better coordinate between Highways and Streets and the Active Transportation Council, and to get folks that are on perhaps some of the subgroups or other committees a little bit more multimodal, and making sure there's more diversity in a lot of the groups that are creating these, but also really focusing on you know, a lot of the publications are very much bottom up. So I think we're really going to be focusing on working with that joint committee on highways and streets and the Active Transportation Council on providing that top-down guidance and what we want to see in the overall document prior to it even, you know, going through the NCHRP process or, you know, getting too far into development.
Great, thanks, Shannon.
And I think Rob is on multiple committees at AASHTO, so he might have some good perspective.
Yes, just give me a thumbs up, Shannon, if you can hear me. I have unmuted myself. Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, thank you for an opportunity to chime in with this group. My name is Rob Biedenbaugh. I'm with South Carolina DOT, and I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to serve on the group that guided the research roadmap, and also serve in a design capacity with AASHTO and on the Active Transportation Council. So I'll certainly offer some insight on the publications. And AASHTO is a research-driven organization. So when material makes it into the design manuals that AASHTO endorses, it's going to be founded in some very strong research principles, as opposed to maybe more forward-thinking organizations such as NACTO that may adopt something based purely on a practice. And as part of what we're trying to do as members of AASHTO is reach out to groups like NACTO that are more forward-thinking to try to incorporate their feedback and experience into our documents. But just recognize that historically AASHTO has been, I don't want to say slow to change, but very cautious to change because of the tremendous impact on safety and operations that our guidance can have on the country. So once AASHTO publications are created, they become adopted by federal highways, and they are immediately implemented on a very broad scale. So there is a certain level of caution about putting something in there, but certainly speaking on behalf of South Carolina DOT, we've learned that in the right context, we can embrace some very forward-thinking ideas without necessarily having them in an AASHTO publication. So contextually, we reach out to other organizations, and I keep using NACTO because they're a great example. They have some very well-written, very well thought out publications that we rely on as transportation engineers, but we certainly stop short of calling them a standard or an adopted publication because of that research component not being there. And that really drives the emphasis on the importance of the research roadmap and how critical it is to what we do is to have that strong research foundation that grounds the information and allows us to adopt it in those publications, knowing that it's been well vetted and well tested. So I hope might not be as encouraging as you want to hear, but certainly speaking on behalf of one of our major publications, which is the Green Book. That's an acronym for the Geometric Design Manual that guides state DOTs around the country. We have made a very concerted effort to ensure that NACTO is brought to the table to be part of that conversation, and with the goal of trying to be more forward-thinking and more innovative in how we implement active transportation. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We had another question from the audience. Is there a wiki tool for this? And if not, are there plans to create a smart or intuitive search tool that might be very useful?
Yeah, I love this question because I think there should be. I will, first of all, I'll sort of give you, unfortunately, sort of the bureaucratic kind of answer to this, in that sort of the way NCHRP projects work is the product is it's a document. It's not something interactive. And part of the reason for that is that, we were under contract to produce something. We've spent the money, the contract ends, and then there's sort of no mechanism to for us as the contractors to do more work on this. But all along, I kept thinking it'd be great to sort of have this online somewhere so it's a little more interactive, or easier to update than just a static document. And so that is something, the documents are, they are NCHRP and AASHTO documents. We do not, as the team, don't have control over them anymore. But that is something that I can talk with Shannon more about, of different ways that we could share this information that beyond just a big PDF document that doesn't change. So I appreciate that idea.
Wonderful, thanks. There was a question in the chat about if the roadmap includes trails as a context of active transportation. And I see, Jennifer, thank you for answering that. Yes, it does. I don't see any other questions. So we're just about at the top of our time. So I will pause just for about 5 or 10 seconds to see if we have any final questions. And if not, we will wrap up today. Okay, well, not seeing any further questions, we will wrap things up. So I want to just thank again Jennifer Dill and Shannon Eccleston for the time and expertise today in preparing for this presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us on this APBP webinar. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you all next time. So thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank all of you. Yeah, keep up all your good work.